This is Land of Havilah, Isaiah 14. In the last chapter, it was the day of Yahweh. There was terror and destruction. The Babylonian invasion to come would be a picture of the great and terrible day of the Lord. But eventually Babylon would be destroyed, according to Isaiah's prophecy. Now more prophecy for Israel and Babylon, that after all this is over, Israel will recover and Babylon won't. First, the positive word for Israel, verse 1. For Yahweh will have compassion on Jacob and will yet choose Israel and set them in their own land. The foreigner will join himself with them, and they'll unite with the house of Jacob. The peoples will take them and bring them to their place. The house of Israel will possess them in Yahweh's land for servants and for handmaids. They'll take as captives those whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their oppressors. It will happen in the day that Yahweh will give you rest from your sorrow, from your trouble, and from the hard service in which you were made to serve. Comments verses 1 and 2 were fulfilled when Cyrus the Great issued his edict in 539 B.C. that the Jews could return to the Promised Land. The book of Ezra records the details of that return. Getting to some specifics of the return, in verse 1, the foreigner will join himself with them, and in verse 2, the house of Israel will possess the foreigners for servants and handmaids. That fulfillment is recorded in Ezra 2, 64 and 65, which says that 42,360 Jews returned to the Promised Land in the first wave, and with them 7,337 servants, which we can assume were foreigners since they were numbered separately from the Jews. In addition to the historical fulfillment of verses 1 and 2, there's also the millennial fulfillment to keep in mind, that after the terrors of the Great Tribulation, Israel will dwell securely in the land, Ezekiel 34:28, and all peoples, nations, and languages will serve the King of Israel, the Lord Jesus Christ, Daniel 7:14. And in Isaiah 60, verse 12, in that time, quote, that nation and kingdom that will not serve you shall perish, end quote. The prophecy of Deuteronomy 28:13 will come to pass, speaking of Israel's place among the nations, quote, Yahweh will make you the head and not the tail, end quote. In verse 1, the foreigner will join himself with Israel. We have to wonder if that's speaking of believing Gentiles joining themselves to Israel in the millennium. They'll unite with the house of Jacob in verse 1. But now coming up, it won't turn out so well for Babylon. Babylon will be ruined. Speaking of Israel, verse 3, that you'll take up this parable against the king of Babylon and say, how the oppressor has ceased, the golden city has ceased. Yahweh has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of the rulers, who struck the peoples in wrath with a continual stroke, who ruled the nations in anger with a persecution that no one restrained. Comment in verses 4 to 6, the restored Israel will take up a parable or saying against the king of Babylon, how your oppression is ceased. Oppression is a thing of the past for Israel. Isn't it remarkable how the tables have turned, they're saying. Your staff and scepter are broken with which you struck the nations in anger and with which you persecuted them. Now, verse 7, the whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break out in song. Yes, the cypress trees rejoice with you, with the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since you're humbled, no lumberjack has come up against us. Comment in verses 7 and 8, the whole earth is at rest, including Lebanon just to the north of Israel, because the Babylonian kingdom has been destroyed. The fulfillment of it is in history past, that Babylon was destroyed as a kingdom, and in prophecy of the millennium, that mystery Babylon will be destroyed. In verse 8, no lumberjack has come against the cedars of Lebanon since Babylon fell, which is a metaphor that the earth is at rest. Coming up, there's a long taunt against the king of Babylon. He's dead and descends to Sheol in the coming verses, and the dead there taunt him mercilessly. Particularly dead kings rise up from their thrones in Sheol to get a look at him and make fun of him. Underneath it also seems to be a prophetic taunt of Satan, because at the beginning of the millennium he'll be bound for 1,000 years and cast into the abyss, Revelation 20, verses 2 and 3. So let's keep the king of Babylon and Satan in mind, that both of them are being taunted in Sheol in the coming verses. Verse 9, Sheol from beneath has moved for you to meet you at your coming. It stirs up the departed spirits for you, even all the rulers of the earth. It's raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. They all will answer and ask you, have you also become as weak as we are? Have you become like us? Your pomp is brought down to Sheol with the sound of your stringed instruments. Maggots are spread out under you, and worms cover you. How you have fallen from heaven, shining one, son of the dawn. How you're cut down to the ground, who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I'll ascend into heaven. I'll exalt my throne above the stars of God. I'll sit on the mountain of assembly in the far north. I'll ascend above the heights of the clouds. I'll make myself like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the depths of the pit. Those who see you will stare at you. They'll ponder you, saying, is this the man who made the earth to tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world like a wilderness and overthrew its cities, who didn't release his prisoners to their home? All the kings of the nations sleep in glory, everyone in his own house. But you're cast away from your tomb like an abominable branch, clothed with the slain, who are thrust through with the sword, who go down to the stones of the pit, like a dead body trodden underfoot. You'll not join them in burial because you've destroyed your land, you've killed your people. The offspring of evildoers will not be named forever. Prepare for slaughter of his children because of the iniquity of their fathers, that they not rise up and possess the earth and fill the surface of the world with cities. I'll rise up against them, says Yahweh of armies, and cut off from Babylon name and remnant, and son's son, says Yahweh. I'll also make it a possession for the porcupine and pools of water. I'll sweep it with the broom of destruction, says Yahweh of armies. Comment verses 9 to 23 we just read, the king of Babylon is ruined and Satan is ruined. In verse 10, there's weak as dead kings. In verse 11, their pomp is now maggots and worms. In verses 13 and 14, they said to themselves they would ascend to heaven and make themselves like God, which takes us all the way back to Genesis 11, that in Babel the people said they would build a city and a tower to heaven. The theme of Babylonian-style pride and rebellion against God runs from there to the end of history. But in verse 15, the king of Babylon and Satan are brought down to Sheol. In verse 16, those who see them in Sheol are amazed how weak and powerless they look. In verses 20 to 22, their offspring are evildoers who will be slaughtered, never more to be mentioned, and they won't rise up to possess the earth, because in verse 22, Yahweh has risen up against them to cut off from Babylon name and remnant, to make a purge of evil forever. Yahweh will sweep Babylon with a broom of destruction in verse 23. Now speaking of the Assyrians who conquered the northern kingdom during Isaiah's lifetime, this was before the Babylonians were a factor, verse 24. Yahweh of armies has sworn, saying, surely as I have thought, so shall it happen. As I have purposed, so it shall stand, that I'll break the Assyrian in my land and tread him underfoot on my mountains. Then his yoke will leave them, and his burden leave their shoulders. This is the plan that's determined for the whole earth. This is the hand that's stretched out over all the nations. For Yahweh of armies has planned, and who can stop it? His hand is stretched out, and who can turn it back? Comment verses 24 to 27, Yahweh's plan, which cannot be stopped, is that he'll break the Assyrian in his land, in verse 25, and over the whole earth, in verse 26. He'll free the land from Assyrian oppression. The ancient fulfillment of it was that the Babylonians conquered the Assyrians in 605 BC, and the future fulfillment of it, the breaking of the oppressive yoke over the whole earth in verse 26, will be when Christ returns to defeat his enemies and set up the millennial kingdom in Zion. It'll happen in verse 27. God's hand is stretched forth on the matter. Who can turn it back? In verse 24, surely it shall happen. So it shall stand. Whatever God thinks, so shall it be. Now concerning another oppressive nation, how about those Philistines who've been oppressing Israel off and on for so long? Isaiah received this prophecy against Philistia in the year King Ahaz died, verse 28. This burden was in the year that King Ahaz died. Don't rejoice, O Philistia, all of you, because the rod that struck you is broken, for out of the serpent's root an adder will emerge, and his fruit will be a fiery flying serpent. Comment in verses 28 and 29, Philistia, don't rejoice because the Assyrians have been defeated, because it's only going to get worse for you. In fulfillment of this, the Philistines entered the dustbin of history in process of time when the Assyrians subjugated them, which Isaiah witnessed. Then further, when the Babylonians entered the picture in 604 BC, about 100 years after this prophecy, the Philistines tried to rebel against Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, but he destroyed them, including the Philistine cities of Ashkelon and Ekron, and from there the Philistines faded from history. So chalk up another one for Isaiah. The adder that struck Philistia in verse 29 was Assyria, but then came the flying serpent that finished them off, which was Babylonia. Still speaking of the destruction of Philistia, verse 30, the firstborn of the poor will eat, and the needy will lie down in safety, and I'll kill your root with famine, and your remnant will be killed. Howl, gate, cry, city, you're melted away, Philistia, all of you, for smoke comes out of the north, and there's no straggler in his ranks. What will they answer the messengers of the nation? That Yahweh has founded Zion, and in her the afflicted of his people will take refuge. Comment in verses 30 to 32, which is the end of the chapter. The destruction of Philistia, like the destructions of Assyria and Babylonia, all of them oppressors of Israel, their destructions are foreshadowings of what Yahweh will do in end times. He'll destroy the oppressors of his people. In verse 32, Yahweh has founded Zion, and in her the afflicted of his people will take refuge. Jesus will return to found Zion. He'll rule from there over the earth. In verse 30, there's good news for the poor and needy in Philistia who are humble in the sight of God. God will spare them, quote, the firstborn of the poor will eat, and the needy will lie down in safety, end quote. But the root and remnant of Philistia will be killed. That is, none of the haughty and oppressive spirit of Philistia, Assyria, Babylonia, or the world will survive the coming purge. Isaiah 15 is next.